Oh, so yeah, recently we've looked at quite a lot of theoretical stuff. I hope it's been kind of useful in building people's understanding of how the Yiquan paradigm kind of developed. Today I want to get a little bit more practical. There's still some theory to understand, but I get a little bit more practical to help us understand this idea of the timing that comes from muscles. Remember, I talked about this idea that if you do this kind of posture, the muscles fly off the bone, and we kind of time the return to use that feeling of the muscles flying off the bone. And we call this somatic timing. Somatic meaning body, bodily, not soma in the way that it's used in Buddhism. It's a different word. Somatic timing. And just like everything else in Yiquan, it's a little piece of the puzzle that we unlock, and then all of a sudden the puzzle opens up into multiple different directions, and each one's a whole new little puzzle in and of itself. And the best way to do that is to start thinking about this practically and practicing practically, so that we can get a feeling for the kind of things that I'm talking about. So remember that I talked about this idea that this movement, this is like the basic unit, if you like, within somatic timing. This is the movement where you do that all the muscles kind of fly off the bone and stop like that. It's the fundamental unit of time that we want to use to time our overall way that we structure our movement within the structural movement paradigm. But remember, I also said that it's not actually about time. You can do that movement faster or slower, and that's the unit of time. However fast you do it, however good your fa li is, will amplify this effect. And so you can't just think about it as 1, 2, 3, getting into that kind of idea that that's the timing. It's not. The timing can change, but this is the fundamental unit that times our movements. And what this is doing is it's opening an entirely different way of thinking about movement that wasn't contained within Xingyiquan. So remember, in the previous video I talked about this idea of, you can see that the movement is there, by the way, in the step like that. That's exactly what it is, and it's evolved naturally because that's the perfect amount of time. It's the perfect movement for just getting the muscles on the body to just go like that into the movement. See what I'm doing there with the drag routine, that it drags and then kicks back like that. What would later in Yiquan become kickback routine evolves into that. You can see that that's evolved naturally in Xingyiquan, that movement, because that's just the exact perfect amount of time. You can extend it, but it's still just that little bit at the end. The rest of it is nothing to do with it. That's just moving your body to another place, and then this kind of release force using this linear fa li concept. And we use that in multiple different ways within Yiquan. That's a puzzle in itself that unfolds into different elements like linear fa li and fishtail fa li and moving back fa li and all kinds of things that we'll talk about another time. Today we're just pretty much focusing, for the most part to begin with anyway, on the idea of linear fa li, forwards and backwards. So we see it in traditional Xingyiquan, that very good video of traditional Xingyiquan that I posted. We see it in that, and then we also see the problem. It contains the seeds of its own destruction, if you like, in that it's single big power movements. And the idea, of course, we've talked about is like, how do you then bring that into combinations? But the idea that we didn't talk about that makes each one completely different, say for example to Western boxing, is the idea of chain fa li. So remember, I talked about a guy who I'd seen who was doing Tai Chi, and he was doing fa li with every movement. Every single movement he was doing was a single movement. And when I talked about him releasing himself from that paradigm, well, one of the benefits of doing that is you can start thinking about chain fa li. So I want to hit one way, and then I want to hit the other. So let's say I want to hit out this way, and then I want to hit in that way like that. Different chain fa li, and that's just 2. I'm just doing 2 with my arm. These are the kind of the easier ones. You can see lots of videos of me doing stuff with kicks and combinations and stuff like that. We're chaining the fa li together. And this is one of the things that emerges from our understanding of Xingyiquan and how we think about how it functions and its limitations. that once we release ourselves from that paradigm, we can start to chain Fa Li together and think differently. And in many cases, we can't do that within the Xingyiquan paradigm because we're using this linear movement that doesn't lend itself to that. It's quite hard to, if you just keep releasing force with this, creates this kind of very stuttered sort of movement that, well, we want to, for one thing, it's not completely practical. We want to bring in other things into that, and it's too slow. We could have used this kind of movement all the time. So it's not practical for chaining Fa Li together into chains, hence chain Fa Li. But we can do it a bit, and once we cross that bridge of thinking about chain Fa Li, we can start thinking again about our somatic timing and how that functions, because this all then begins to knit together again on an entirely different level. Again, this structural symmetry of the Yiquan paradigm that I talked about, this is another reason why Wang Shangjai thought, and indeed I think, this is what we're talking about when we say the wushu of the ancients. It doesn't just all knit together like this for no reason. And it's not that someone invented it in the past and then it was passed down. It's that the people in the past accessed this. They accessed what I've called the infinite curriculum. That it's just within the nature of movement itself, it's within the nature of human movement that this all links together in this way. This is why when we say each one is natural, this is what we mean. It's not innate, it's in nature. It's in the nature of movement itself. Hence, the people in the ancient world could unfold it and we can rediscover it in the modern world. It's not supper time. Dogs know it, don't they? Natural movement, you do it all the time, this kind of thing. Mate, it's not supper time. Hey. So, it's not supper time, go on. So what we want to do is start thinking about, well, how do we begin to learn chain Fa Li, which is quite an advanced concept, I know, but to understand somatic timing and chain Fa Li, and then how that all links together into the paradigm of each one, I think it's quite important at this point. And there certainly are some things that we can start looking at and thinking about this. And we've already started to prepare a little bit for this. Remember when I did the 15-minute standing exercise, pushing forward and pushing back at the same time. I'm going to begin with something a little bit like that. Our energy's going to go forward and then it's going to go backwards. So we've already looked at the idea of using this kind of push movement. We've already looked at, actually you don't have to do this with the foot. Some people do. Some people just keep it in the leg like that. Some people use the scrape rooting like that. I think you should use the scrape rooting because it just extends the posture and just makes it a little bit stronger in the moment, and it adds a little bit of extra. I think it's scientific that you should do that, but we definitely want to do it for this because it really emphasizes our use of somatic timing. Excuse me. No, he's just standing there being ace. Mate, go on. Oh, mate. No. So what we want to do is we want to push. First of all, we'll start by doing that. Hopefully you've been practicing that. It's actually miles harder than it looks to do that. And then we go like that. This is our somatic timing. Using that, all the muscles fly off the body, and then we pull it back into the movement like that. And what we want to do is add on to that, is to use that somatic timing in the most basic way, and that's to go forwards and then backwards. And so the exercise we're going to do first is 1, then 2, like that, and we're just going to elbow backwards like that, which is a posture we haven't looked at before, but it doesn't matter. This is the way that this kind of integrated curriculum works, that it suggests itself very naturally from the posture. So 1, and then instead of just bouncing back into our position like that, we're going to like that into the hip back like that again, like that. One more time this way, like that. I don't need to do tons, you can do them. And you don't need to do them full force. You can do it like, and And indeed, most of the time, you should be practicing like that. If you just do it like Farley all the time, you'll really damage your body. So we can do it quite relaxed like that. So one, and then just hit back into and this is just opening like that, just like you were going to throw a punch, only your elbow back like that. And you just emphasise the back movement. 1, 2, and just twist a little bit like that with it. So I know when people see it practice like that, it's like, what's that for? It's like, yeah, well, we're practicing different things, not the power. We're practicing core quintessence movement skills so that when we bring the power in, it's got the right consistency of movement in. So 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Just get that bounce back. Get that bounce back. 1, 2. And if you like, you can do it with the other elbow as well. We can go like that. And what's going to happen here is you're going to start experiencing this phenomenon that I've talked about, that all the stuff around rooting and posture, you don't just learn all of this. You don't just learn it by rote. You don't have a teacher stood over you telling you how to do it. Remember, Wang Xingyiquan said, you already know everything you need to know. There are no secrets. That's just such a... People think he meant like that he was very open. There are no secrets. He didn't mean that at all. He meant literally, there are no secrets. So all these people are like, I travelled across China for... Well, it's Wang Xingyiquan himself, isn't it? I travelled across China for years and spent tens of thousands of pounds, and that's why now you've got to pay me a fortune to learn these secrets that I know. No, it's always all in you. It's all in you. A teacher can save you a lot of time. There's no secrets because it's all in you and it's all kind of natural movement. 1, 2. The way that the posture works, that this foot goes out a little bit and that you start to inline your feet like that to balance the posture. 1, 2, like that. See how when I do this lead hand, the foot comes out. I've talked about this kind of movement before where it widens the posture like that. Your body will just do that naturally. Just because someone puts a name on it, or even more so, a Chinese name, doesn't mean that it's somehow some secret thing that someone has to teach you. Once you start getting a little bit more intermediate, all these things will start happening to your body. It's like martial arts puberty. It'll all start knitting together, and then just like growing up, you'll start filling out a bit, and you'll realise people didn't have to teach you all of this stuff. Just diligent training, just from the basics. Teachers just give you like seeds that you grow. So I'm elbowing backward this way, like that. 1, 2, 1, 2 with the lead hand. So that's quite basic, and you can practice it 1, 2 like that, just like I've shown you. But next, realise that all of these then start suggesting puzzles. Like, well, what if I want to hit over here? And what if I want to hit over there? So this is in part the idea that I've called a configuration, that in the old Wushu language used to be called a constellation. How do the different parts of your body, if I want to do that, this is my constellation. If I want to do that, this is my constellation. But now I want to hit forward like that, what's my constellation? So it starts asking, you start asking yourself all these problems. I want to... So in essence, each one is just something incredibly simple. Once you can release force, then all it is like, can you form the right configuration with the right body consistency to hit? That's the whole system, is that. It's nothing, it's the simplest thing in the world, like Guo Yunshan says. It's too simple. People don't want it to be that simple. That's all it is. It's just that then unfolds into, it's like this, again, this daft little thing here, this daft little simple thing, that's a piece of the infinite Tao. Yeah, it just unfolds into so many different, into an infinite world of discovery of physical movement with implications that are just absolutely mind-blowing. And one of the things is like, okay, yeah, configuration, but there's an infinite possibility of human possible configurations, and there's multiple different kinds of human body as well. So it unfolds into, well, what's the configuration for this, and how do I release force in that direction, and so on. So it unfolds all these puzzles and presents you with all these different puzzles. And again, this is something like, so if you're thinking like, inevitably beginners, initially they want to be told what everything is. So it's like, we do 1, 2, and you do 1, 2. But what we're trying to do is reach a certain point of critical mass where something just changes and you just know, how to form the right configuration to release force in a particular direction. And one of the ways that we explore that is just thinking about it like puzzles, thinking about it in terms of puzzles. If I'm here, how do I release force with how do I headbutt, how do I release force with my hip or something like that? We could look at all of that another time maybe. So here we have a similar sort of puzzle that we're going to go 1, 2 like that, and let's say we want to hit forward like that, and there's different ways that we could. Here's our somatic timing, and here's where our somatic timing starts having to make compromises, just like everything else. It's the doctrine of the mean. We've got to think about how our somatic timing functions now on a completely different level. Just like, routing unfolded into multiple different things, just like the idea of a configuration, beginning with this most basic configuration, then unfolded into a whole universe of possibilities of releasing force. Now I've got to think about how somatic timing unfolds into a whole universe of releasing force, in harmony with configuration, of course. So 1, we hit like this, we hit back, that's our backwards forwards. 1, 2, somatic timing. Here, we're just going to change into the punch like that. I'm going to go. And you can see there's inevitably there's a time difference between that and that. It's hit and stop, and again, remember this is why we're using hit and stop, so that we can do chain fa li. This is why it feeds into this paradigm, why it evolves from Xingyiquan in this way. 1, 2, hit and stop. We don't want to go 1, 2, hit and stop, relax, and then punch. That'll make it even longer. But I've got to go one way, release force, and it's got to be meaningful release force. So I don't just want to go like that into 1, 2 like that. In fact, and it's got to be meaningful release force. But nevertheless, I can start getting it pretty fast from there to there using chain fa li principles and using a 1, 2, and then this fa li is going to be around the axis like that. Let's see what I can do. So yeah, I can feel in myself, the more I make a compromise with hitting this guy, like the less power I can get in hitting this guy. So this is also one of the things, like, you see people all the time, this kind of trapping, all this kind of stuff. We can do a bit of trapping. Actually, you're making compromises all the time between speed and power. That's got to be acknowledged, that other than bamboozling people with a lot of slaps to the face, that's not necessarily actually going to do anything. Goes like that. Well, you're going, whatever you do, what if someone's doing all of that and they go like that and just go and spark you out. So you've got to think about that. It's a big divergent train of thought to think about. But anyway, point being, just be wary in the general terms of those very fast flurries of movements, that really serious kind of chain fa li concepts. Really think about as I move from one configuration into another configuration, what's the compromise between hitting back with power and hitting in another direction with power. So this way, 1, 2, I can get equal power because of the somatic timing of the movement. Bounce, just goes boing, 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 like that, boing, boing, but it doesn't go boing, boing, boing in the same way, because this way the fa li is just harder to. See, if I actually do it forward, like, the fa li is harder to get going back that way, unless I do it this way. So if I go like that I looked at before, I go push, punch, then I use the somatic timing to hit this. God, Wouldn't have pushed a coconut off a tree this way, like that. I don't have to push him over, remember. So this is the other thing about pushing, like, I think I said before, like, I'm pretty big, I weigh too much, and I'm quite strong, but you don't have to push me all of my weight, like as if I was like a boulder on the floor. Then it'd be quite hard to push. All you've got to do is push the top part of my weight over the centre line to get me moving, get me off balance. That's all you've got to do, and that's miles easier to do. And then the weight of my body actually becomes a disadvantage to me, because then I've got to control it. I've got to put myself back with my one pack. I've got to control it back like that. And if I can just push someone just back a little bit like that and then hit them, then that's what we call like force amplification, that the hit doesn't actually amplify the force, but it amplifies the effects of the force. Push you and then hit you again. How many fights do you see start like that, where people push like that and then they wait to be pushed back? It's a social construction of violence. You shouldn't be doing. If you're going to push, then follow up straight away with the hit. Don't lose your advantage. By the next time, like, I push him, he pushes me. The next time I push him, he goes like that. Proper Chen Tai Chi's me like that with a big chest drop like that, which is the way you do it in Chen Tai Chi. Someone pushes you, drop like that. And he braces himself, all of a sudden, advantage gone from that push. So I could do it like that, 1, 2, like that, into the pivot routing. But where's this? And I can go like that using a kind of reverse quarter routing. Like that, 1, 2, see the foot go. Like that. But how do I do this? See, it's like puzzle solving, and all these puzzles then just suggest solutions around the structural movement paradigm. So 1, 2, 3. And what you want to do then is just practice. And you'll find that it'll start throwing you off, so you'll be thinking about one when you're doing the other one. See if you'll be going for that, but throwing the punch, and you'll be going for the elbow, but throwing the punch. And this is all about brain training. It's all about like letting your E go to a more sophisticated level. Remember, I've talked about this idea of managing this sophisticated computer. That's all it is. And you'll find these little, what seem like really simple acts of coordination are just like suddenly become mind-boggling. It's like, why can't I do that? It's like, no, your E isn't good enough. It's not, your E hasn't cultivated its interconnection with your body enough yet. And even the E itself, the intent itself, don't start thinking of it in terms like a soul, like something fully formed that's just in you from birth. It's not. That in itself is partly, significantly socially constructed, this idea of intent. So that's being trained as well. So practice and don't do this. Remember, I talked about not doing this kind of posture, just straight into the, and then into the punch. See, I'm doing like multiple different variations of it as my E's calculating different, and I think it goes on to unless I consciously think about it, like just make sure that the power goes backwards before it goes forwards. It's just the way that, this is a really good example, I think, of like how our E is very much socially structured, that it's focused more on the forward. So, and that's going to manifest itself as, if I don't think about it, that's going to be the one that's compromised with, and then I'm going to change to that. So I have to think about, and I have to be consciously engaged with the movements. Change. And the more I do that, the more it slows down the movement into the punch. That's about as fast as I can get it with, enough power to hit both targets meaningfully. And that's somatic timing. But remember, that doesn't mean that someone else couldn't do that faster. I think I could probably do it faster if I practiced it a little bit. It's a little bit of an unusual, it's not a movement I normally practice. I just thought of it on the spot for this. I could get it faster if I practiced it a bit, but there's a certain point at which I can't release force any faster than that, and that's like the limit of my somatic timing. So from this way, it's 1, 2, 3, and we use the pivot route. So look at this, the Farley is linear, 1, 2, one is linear forward and then linear backwards using this backwards movement. So this is no longer just returning us back to the stance, this is the far leap going backwards. 1, 2, and then this is pivot rooting into the punch. I suspect I'll be slower this way because I'm left-handed, so this is like southpaw for me. Orthodox is like southpaw for me. And that division between left and right, that's profoundly socially constructed, that we can do things better one way than the other. That's not natural. I don't believe it. That's not natural at all. That's entirely socially constructed. I'm going to go out on a limb. I'm going to go out on my left limb and say that. So 1, 2, back, and then change into the punch. Yeah, it's much easier on my other side, no question. Like that. That's using our somatic timing but also compromising it. So the last one. So now the interesting thing to recognise about that is that the somatic timing was there in the third movement, but it was different. So this is our 1, 2 somatic timing. Now that's gone, that somatic timing is gone. The chain far lead continues. We just switch to a different kind of far lead, the rotational far lead around the axis. So linear far lead, forward and back, rotational far lead around the axis. That's one somatic timing, and then here we start a new incidence of somatic timing. So see when I hit here and all the muscles fly forward. Now I can use somatic timing again into another posture. So let's say I hit here and change this way into a hook. So I was say here, somatic timing, another incidence of somatic timing. So that's 1 and that's 2 incidence of somatic timing linked together. So I'm using the muscle bounce like that twice. So let's see if we can link them together anyway. So that's linking them all together into a whole chain of far lead. So now watch me emphasise the hip back more and see what happens. There's something that I can flag up here that might not affect everyone, but certainly later on, or if people are a little bit more advanced, as you start, I encourage you to think about your own chain far lead. Use the idea of the infinite curriculum, the multiplier effect. You can access the Yiquan curriculum, just take the things that you already know. Use the multiplier effect to put them together to create these chain far lead postures. But something you might find sometimes with some movements, if you emphasize movement in one direction, it changes the power generation into another posture. So just like I've got to emphasize 1 back, forward. So if you're doing that, you might find that when you do 1, 2, that from here you can't get into the front pivot routing in the way that I do. That's because that's a really advanced skill. If you do that, that's brilliant, by the way. That's outstanding level. But I'm safe for myself. You might also find that you can't do that. That when you go here, that you have to change into kind of back pivot routing to get the hook in like that, which is legitimate. It's a legitimate technique. But the reason that happens is the chain far lead has a memory. So the way that you issue force one way feeds into another posture, makes it slightly different. It's like an angle that just keeps widening like that. The problem can just affect every movement. So even within 4 movements, you can find all of a sudden that you can't do the posture in the same way. It's called the chain having a memory. It's like you overemphasize that changes that, maybe put a little bit more power into it. And to get this hook in suddenly becomes too much of an awkward movement, and you've got to change to do it like that. It's a perfectly valid posture. It's the kind of thing like if you have to move out of the way like that, and you change into the hooking up hook, cutting up hook. You change and use the back We just haven't looked at it yet, that's all. So you don't want to use your front pivot root when you're leaning over the leg like that, because it can buckle the ankle. But that's something that you might find. We'll look at it another time with some better examples of it. But for most people, you're not going to find that a problem at the moment. You're just going to work on your own chain Farley and just think about, well, what do you know? You know, like, you know, or elbow or something like that. Just putting postures together and seeing how they fit together and creating your own drills like that. And just learning about somatic timing like that. Thinking about the way that, instead of 1, 2, getting that like that. 1, 2, that bounce with the somatic timing. You can see why in traditional Xingyiquan, usually if they do this posture, this push posture, Zhao does it in that video that I showed. Usually you haven't got this, because you want to save that for the next movement like. Usually with this follow-on root step. But it soon, for all the reasons we've talked about, it soon starts becoming a really limited paradigm. But there's an exercise we can use a little bit like that that begins to help us understand a little bit about this idea that we talked about, hit and flow in Tai Chi, where there's a very brief lock point and then you in your movement like that. And here's where we start to bring it into each one. We can use it in very sophisticated ways, and I don't know every way, obviously. No one does. It's an infinite curriculum for a reason. But there's a really good example of this that we can use that kind of explains how it's been adapted a little bit into each one. So we're going to use this scrape routine, but we're going to use the version where it just stops like that. And again, we're going to just use the push to the hit and stop. And then we're just going to flow straight into the punch. And even though it doesn't look like that, it's the same concept of hit and flow into the next movement. Because there's the lock point, everything tenses, but even as the muscle is rebounding back, we go straight into the movement in the other direction. And we need that. Why it's the same kind of movement is because of the quality of muscle relaxation that we need to immediately relax into the posture. So I'll demonstrate it properly first. And this one. And hit and stop with the punch so you can get the feeling. It's not the most powerful way of doing it. Again, this is why Xingyiquan had to be adapted and evolved. This is much more, even doing it like that with a step and then is the traditional Xingyiquan way of doing it. By no means the most powerful way of doing it, but it can be useful. All these little scrape rooting postures, they're all really useful for really close range things where people are right on you. So what can, particularly with elbows and stuff like that. So we can use this exact hit and flow, hit and flow posture. Hit with the elbow, hit with the shoulder, hit with the elbow, or hit with the. I'm using some slightly different kinds of Farley, not just linear, isn't just forward. So what we call fishtailing, where the hip comes out, the heel comes out like that. But we can use this kind of movement where it's release Farley with a short kind of scrape family routing, followed by a technique that flows straight in. So the somatic timing is different. It's no longer 1, 2, 1, 2. You can see it's faster. It's faster than doing. It's faster. It's straight in from the hit and stop straight into the. It's faster, but it's a little bit weaker. It can be compensated for by increasing the Farley around the body. It can be compensated for. So if you try it on the bag, for example, and you try putting your full power in it, it can be compensated for. But again, there's usually a price to pay. Like if you compensate for it, you're usually widening the movement a little bit, making you a little bit more vulnerable like that. There's only so much you can, there's only so much you can generate. You hit a certain point where you've got to start adding in other things, like a bigger movement again, to generate extra force in certain situations. Again, this is the art of the configuration. The art of what is the right configuration. I haven't got enough force here, how do I change my configuration? I make it bigger. Now there's a compromise because I'm much more vulnerable now. Can easily be pulled off balance. So the art of the configuration is like all of Yiquan. It's all about doctrine of the mean. Where's the compromise point? And is it justified? Go for the push and into the, or we can do it with the backhand, but again, use the rear pivot route now. So notice we're not using the pivot route at all. That's for very good reasons. Like, we don't want to go forward and then into the pivot route like that, because you're just going to go over on your ankle like that. So please don't do that. It's 1, 2, 3, like that. We only do that if we go back and then onto the pivot route like that. 1, 2, 1, 2. We practice that on its own. We drill that. So many things we need that for. But for this, where we hit and stop with the straight routing, 1, 2, like that. We don't do it on the pivot route like that. Look how my weight's leaning forward to get the power in. Again, another compromise to get it's such a weak movement. To get the compromise I'm having to do this to get the power in. I mean, it's not wrong. This is what you've got to get with structural movement. It's an infinite paradigm. If it wins the fight, that's not wrong, is it? It's not wrong. But if you get caught and pulled like that, then you took a risk and it didn't work out. So, but there's things that we can plan for. So not, for example, going 1, 2 and onto the pivot routing like that. 1, 2 straight into the punch. All of a sudden we've lost our power. But back foot, straight onto the pivot route like that. Using the backhand, we can just use the pivot route because we're using our vertical thigh straight away. Like that. You can see it's ironically slower if I pull my foot back. It's ironically slower. It's an Alanis Morissette lyric. Because I go from here, 1, 2. So I'm ironically faster if I pull my foot back. We go 1, 2 like that into the punch like that. But if I go like that, there's just a little bit of a pause. Maybe that's not even visible. I feel like in my own body that that's slightly slow. And particularly if I commit to the hit and stop, and I let go of my somatic bounce back, I just get frozen in the moment because all the energy is dissipating before I change into the. So I'm still using that somatic time, still one bounce into the movement like that. But here I can. The reason is, of course, this thing that I've talked about all the time. It's what you feed into the equation of the Fa Li. So I'm feeding something different in now if I pull my foot back. I'm feeding in extra rotation, like pulling it back like that. I'm feeding into it. And it's allowing me to get more on my pull back of my arm if I pull this foot back like that. Nevertheless, that's not what we want. We want to practice the hit and stop from the foot. Come on, hit and stop and then pivot. To get this principle of hit and flow that we get from Tai Chi, not waiting for the bounce back like that. Because there's plenty of other things where that doesn't work, that we add into that equation, which runs straight into the movement. So I think I've only shown a couple of exercises, but it's not the exercises, it's the principle. So just by practicing those, just by thinking about those, that's enough for the moment, that's enough for this lesson. To just take away and have a go at that, to begin exploring somatic timing. And of course, as we've got a few different kinds of Fa Li yet to have a look at, we've also got to think about how our somatic timing works more with punches and elbows, and what punches and elbows do different things with the routing because of the balancing and things like that. So all these things have got to be factored in together. But we only want to take it one step at a time. So practice the exercises that I've shown you today. Just try and get those principles together. Have a practice of them. Have a practice of chain Fa Li and thinking about. Just break it down to single movements at first and just think about things like, from all the things that we've done, things like push elbow, you know, and push elbow, and just thinking about, so you're always using the somatic timing one way or another. So you can bring that into even just much more basic combinations where you're going 1, 2, for example, and bringing it into going back and looking at all those basic combinations that I've shown, and even just like breaking it down to 1, 2, that's the best way to do it. Like 1, 2, 1, 2, and just 1, 2, and thinking about how do you use this somatic timing in your movement? How do you then feed that into Fa Li, and Fa Li in turn feeds back into the somatic movement. It's somatic timing. It's a virtuous circle that creates the power generation in structural movement. It's as simple as that, and it's as complex as the infinite Tao itself. Okay, that's enough today. I'm going to go and give the dog his sausage that he's so patiently waiting for. One love. Remember, it's not where you're from, whatever some people might say. It's where you're at. Take it easy, and I'll see you in the next one.